Devil May Cry throws wave after wave of enemies at you from the moment you launch the game to the time you close it. Obviously, you're expected to fight the demons and come out on top, but what if fighting was against my nature? What if I decided to answer a question that nobody has had? Can you beat DMC5 if Dante the legendary Devil Hunter was actually a pacifist? Alright, so what the heck does that actually mean? Basically, I'm attempting to beat the game on the hardest difficulty without Dante himself ever attacking. So anything that deals damage by putting the Son of Sparta in an attacking animation is out of the question. For reference, that's most of his kit. But there are a select few things that leave the blood off of his hands and let him spread love and peace throughout Redgrave. Meet Dante's only friend, a hat that doesn't even want to stay on his head. This magic hat floats around the man in red, unleashing its red shot attack like a turret. While it does expend red orbs, the currency of the game, something tells me that's not gonna be an issue. Speaking of man in the red, that's another one of his moves that we're using to meet the pacifism requirement for legal purposes. Officer, I swear it wasn't me, it was the ominous blood rocks floating around. These things slowly orbit our Devil Seeker, swiftly ramping up in speed anytime danger is near. Then we have summoned swords. There's a lot to these that we'll talk more about later, but for now, my preferred method of using them was charging them up for round trips. When they're ready to be sent out, they spin behind Dante like saw blades, and if you just never let them go, you've got a continuous passive damage machine on your back. Obviously, I could also release them to dice up a foe that I couldn't quickly get to, but for the most part, I liked just having them there. Finally, our last option for engagement was Rolling Blaze. With the fist weapon Balrog equipped, jumping passively released a blast that would damage nearby enemies. While foes were dying around me by no fault of my own, I often did taunts. I used the one you get from beating the Bloody Palace to have Dante slick his hair back, which does more than just change his look. During the run, I thought it provided a damage increase based on your Devil Trigger meter, which it does, but according to the wiki, it only applies to your melee weapons, so not as impactful as I thought it was here. Devil Trigger itself was quite useful though. This transformation granted a damage buff to everything, on top of mobilizing my summoned swords when I wasn't using them for round trips. By going into the gunslinger style, the swords would passively target and pierce the nearest demon, providing tons of stagger while my hat and orbiting balls piled on the damage. The prologue went by smoothly, but it didn't take long for issues to start cropping up. The first one I ran into was with Mr. Magic Hat. He follows you, but he can get stuck on the environment, or a cutscene can place the character somewhere other than where they were. When this happens, the little buddy doesn't come with, and if the two of them get too far apart, the hat teleports straight back onto Dante's head. This was a problem because it meant I had to run away and resummon the turret dude, who was kinda my main source of damage. Additionally, if I ever got knocked back by an enemy, I'd lose my friend and the orbs revolving around me. At the very least, the man in the red orbs flew out to hit whatever smacked me, but I still had to resummon them afterwards. Contrary to what you might expect, my overall damage was pretty good. A lot of basic enemies entered the blender and they never left. And against anyone who could block, like these scissors, man in the red was insane. It decimated anyone's guard in a matter of seconds. I can't remember if any bosses throw up a guard though. I guess we'll see. Seriously, for not actually using any attack animations, Goliath's health was melting. Bonus points for being able to straight up disrespect him and dance my heart out. On Dante Must Die, the difficulty I'm doing this run on, enemies and bosses can enter a Devil Trigger of their own. It's a permanent buff that increases their power while cutting the damage they take by 50%. For the most part, this only mattered against the big bosses of the game, because a majority of the riffraff either fell before being able to DT, or their DT didn't change the fact that they were stun locked. One of the hardest encounters in this run was before the boss of Mission 3, where I had to contend with a bunch of riots and a Lusakia. The big floating magic man constantly keeps up a shield that prevents all bullets from reaching it, and both Man in the Red and Magic Hat count as bullets. So I only had two valid ways of dealing with him: jumping in his vicinity with Balrog, or sending the summoned swords his way with round trips. No matter which one I chose, it was slow because he kept teleporting away. I normally like to deal with him first so that he's not throwing magic around all fight, but in this situation, I was forced to leave him for last. Another wrinkle that arose in this battle was screen clutter. I started to find that all the particle effects created by my passive posse made it extremely hard to tell what was going on. Now, I've heard people say this about DMC5's effects in general, but I've never had them pose a problem for me until now. I took so much damage from the lizards by sheer virtue of not seeing what hit me. Hell Judecas are another demon I expected to have the same problem with as the Lusakia. The Judeca has its own bullet shield that only goes away when it initiates an attack. If it's being fired at, Judy's typical response is to just teleport away over and over again. But if it takes a certain amount of hits at close range, it chooses violence. It tries to parry your attack and respond with a slice of its own, but nothing I was doing could be parried because I wasn't doing anything. So the result was Mr. Eka getting stuck in a loop, repeatedly trying to get me off of him until he expired. After flexing on this Angelo, I had to fight Urizen. He protects himself with a crystal that you have to break through, and this encounter was simply that. Smash the crystal and you're done. Remember how I mentioned Man in the Red absolutely shreds shields and guards? As luck would have it, the crystal is Urizen's guard. All I had to do was stand close to it for a few seconds and boom, we were done. Here's another fun fact about Man in the Red that I hadn't mentioned before. Much like Magic Hat, it drains red orbs every time it lands a hit, even if it hits a random object in the environment. I had to step away for a while, conveniently right next to this car, and it wound up costing me 4 million orbs. Against Cavalier Angelo, another boss who puts up a guard, Man in the Red actually did something weird. Instead of instantly shattering his defenses like it does for everything else in the game, it did this. Now, he takes no damage from anything that hits his shield, so this served no practical purpose, but it was funny as hell. This Empusa Queen tried to put a stop to my dancing, but nothing can stop the music. In fact, the EX Provocation Taunt, this dance I'm doing, will shower you with red orbs if you manage to finish it while in a fight, which, considering I was constantly draining my orbs, getting a little refund every now and then was pretty nice. The boss at the end of this mission was Urizen again, but for this fight, Dante begins in Sin Devil Trigger, a form I can't use because its entire existence is meant for violence. While I waited for the meter to drain though, I did utilize jumping because much like having Balrog equipped, that passively dealt damage as I ascended. One of the annoying parts about Urizen in both this fight and the one later on is his wind pressure. Occasionally, he sends out a massive wave of pressure to get you away from him. It doesn't do any damage, but it doesn't need to in order to get rid of my Magic Hat and revolving orbs. So long as it knocked me back, my passive damage dealers would disappear. In an effort to avoid this as often as possible, I tactically entered Devil Trigger to hyper armor through his knockback, and then he fell like all the rest. For mission 14, you fight 3 previous bosses in a strange dream realm, but notably they each have 40% less health than their waking world counterparts. In essence, it was just really satisfying to watch their health bars absolutely melt from me doing nothing more than stand in front of them. After that, I discovered a neat quirk that changed how the summoned swords spun behind me. As we've established, being in Gunslinger while Devil Triggered made the swords shoot out at enemies. But if you have them like this, immediately switch to Swordmaster and then hold the button for round trips, they keep their Gunslinger formation while spinning, so you get 2 on either side of you. I do think it's way worse for damage, but it looks unique and that's gotta count for something, right? Then I found some fellow pacifists and they were elated to show me around their base, but I guess I smelled or something, cause when I looked back, they had all ran off. I guess this fortress of pacifism was mine now, so I passed right through it in order to get to Malphas. This boss has 2 parts you can interact with, the chicken and the witch. If you land enough punishment on the poultry, it'll fall to the ground. On the flip side, for the witch, too much damage will make her temporarily incapacitated. If she's out of commission when the featherless freak gets up, he goes berserk, which in this case just meant he instantly fell over again. This boss ended up spending more time on the ground than anywhere else, and that made it super easy to just chop him up. Fury was a hilarious enemy because all it ever did was teleport into me, get hit, back up, and try again. There was something endlessly amusing about him getting hit because he got too close to me, when all I was doing was standing there and letting him try. Cerberus is one of the healthiest bosses in the game, but I think my blades and orbs were able to hit several of his heads at once, because his HP felt like it was draining just as fast as any other boss, and before I knew it, we were on to the final Urizen battle. It was established with the Lusakia that both of my passives that consume orbs are considered projectiles, and this version of the Usurper is insanely resistant to ranged damage. That doesn't mean my hat friend was worthless, but his effectiveness was certainly neutered, and I had to rely on my summoned swords much more. For his last phase, he uses the corrupted ground around the arena to summon spikes that will impale and leave you open to his follow-up attacks. But after a previous run I did, resident community member Double D told me the secret of the spikes. While it looks like they cover the entire arena, in actuality he spawns a small circle of real spikes on Dante's location, while the entire rest of them are completely fake and harmless. So a well-timed hop backward or roll to the side would get you out of the real spikes and away from any actual danger. Unless you fail to dodge Urizen's subsequent blows, then you're still in danger. Also, if you didn't time the roll properly, you're gonna get impaled. I think jumping backwards is definitely the better option. After he went down, I had to contend with V's pets, and they've never been easier. They got stalemated so frequently and took so much damage that they never posed a threat, and Nightmare had to constantly give up his own vitality to heal them. I was so unbothered about this fight that I didn't even bother getting rid of the Bad Dreams healing pools. At low health, he enters his own stalemate, and curiously, I found that if he's in a state that doesn't allow him to do his stalemate animation, he just stops taking damage at a certain point. At least until he becomes bold. The final boss, Virgil, was surprisingly easy for a very silly reason. At about 60% health, Brother V enters Devil Trigger for the first time, and this first activation of it is super important because it's hella scripted. He will always do a set pattern of attacks that end with a dive bomb before he de-transforms. Internally, he attempts to initiate that dive bomb attack once his DT meter reaches 0, and he can only leave Devil Trigger once that dive bomb has been completed. But apparently, he also has to complete a specific combo before actually transitioning to the big finisher. And if you stagger him out of that combo, he doesn't dive bomb at all. Instead, he goes back to a previous part of his script, sending various attacks your way until he gets to that all-important combo once again. If you can keep staggering him such that he never fully finishes that combo, he never even starts the dive bomb and subsequently never leaves Devil Trigger. That effectively translates to him constantly using moves that leave him wide open for my magic hat to hit him, and it also means he never got the chance to enter phase 3, so no doppelganger either. Once I took care of him, there was one more fight, and this one was even easier. There were no silly DT loops this time. Instead, Virgil would simply take a knee after being knocked back enough, which meant he had no chance because that allowed me to fully put him into the blender. And that was it. So, can you beat DMC5 without having Dante ever swing a weapon? Yes, this run was insanely fun. There were tons of neat and unique interactions I happened upon. It was super entertaining to watch enemies get stun-locked while Dante danced his heart out, and overall, the challenge of it hit a nice balance between satisfying and difficult. That's all I've got for you today. If you made it this far and aren't subscribed, you should definitely hit that button. I'm posting my wacky ideas all the time, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Sayonara.